The pastor's laughter echoed through the cracked church roof. He thought my silence meant surrender, but every drop that fell was counting time for me. Now the roof stands tall, and he prays beneath the name he once mocked. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. My name is Clarence. I'm 56 years old, and this is how I learned that silence can speak louder than revenge. The morning sun poured through the stained glass, warm and fractured. Each beam touched the dust in the air, turning it into gold. The church smelled like worn hymn books and lemon oil, old wood and quiet faith. I'd been sitting in that same third-row pew for years, listening more than talking, praying more than complaining. That Sunday, though, Pastor Jerome's laughter lingered longer than his sermon. He'd just told a story to the congregation about quiet men who confuse humility with weakness. The crowd laughed. Even the ushers grinned. I didn't move. My Bible stayed open, my eyes fixed on the page. He knew who he was talking about. A few weeks before, I'd questioned a spending decision in a deacon meeting. Not loud, just calm. Asked why the church roof still leaked when donations kept rolling in. He smiled back then, too, tight and polite, and said, "Brother Clarence, some things are beyond your pay grade." That stuck, not because of pride, but because of principle. See, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. The church roof had been leaking for 6 months. Rain dripped near the choir stand, close enough for the organ to hum off-key whenever the water hit a socket. Folks joked about it, said the church cried when it rained. But I saw it differently. It wasn't crying. It was warning us. After service, I stepped outside into the Georgia heat. The blacktop shimmered. Gospel music from someone's car radio floated over the parking lot. Shirley Caesar, old school. My friend Darnell leaned against his truck, a toothpick between his teeth. Darnell, "You heard that, huh?" Me, "Yeah." Darnell, "Man was out of line." Me, "He was in character." Darnell laughed. "You gonna let that slide?" Me, "It already slid." He looked at me the way folks do when they don't understand your piece. I just nodded and walked to my car. My tires crunched the gravel slow. I didn't rush. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain started again, soft at first, then steady. I could almost hear it drumming on the church roof across town. My house sat close enough to feel the same weather pattern, same humidity. The sound carried through the trees like tapping fingers on metal. In that rhythm, I found my resolve. I opened my drawer, pulled out a worn folder, the same one that held my mother's deed papers, her will, and my bank documents. I flipped through receipts, statements, pay stubs from my job at the county utilities office. I had a little savings. Not much, but enough to make a point without saying a word. Every man has his breaking point. Mine wasn't anger, it was clarity. Monday morning, I called a local roofing contractor I'd once helped with a permit issue. "You still take church jobs?" I asked. He said, "Depends on the church." "Mount Hope Baptist," I said. He whistled. "That the one off Auburn Avenue?" "Yeah." "Leaky roof, right?" "Exactly." We met that afternoon. I showed him the roof's condition using photos I'd quietly taken after a service. He nodded, gave me a fair estimate. I signed the paper right there. Filed under my name, not the church's. Cash payment, verified and notarized. Filed at the Fulton County Clerk Office. Case number 225-11873. I made sure the records were clean, transparent, legal. Because revenge, when done right, never hides. It just waits. Weeks passed. The pastor's sermons grew louder, more jokes, more smiles. But each laugh only deepened my calm. Every Sunday I sat still, nodding at the right moments, singing low. Nobody suspected a thing. Then came the storm, a heavy July downpour, sky turning charcoal by noon. Rain hit hard, slapping rooftops, filling gutters. The church roof didn't leak this time, not a drop. Folks clapped their hands, saying, "Praise God, he's finally provided." The pastor strutted across the altar, proud and thankful. "See what faith does?" he said. "When you trust in leadership, blessings flow. I smiled behind my mask of silence. Not mockery, not pride, just peace. After service, a few deacons gathered near the side entrance, admiring the craftsmanship. Darnell spotted me again. Darnell: "Man, you see this? Whoever fixed it did a clean job." Me: "Yeah, they did." Darnell: "Huh? Wonder who paid for it." Me: "Maybe someone who got tired of hearing the rain." He chuckled, not catching my meaning, but deep down I knew time would tell. I started showing up early to sweep the front steps, polish the railings, and make sure the signboard letters were straight. Folks thought I was just being helpful, but I was building contrast between noise and action, pride and purpose. By late August, the pastor called another finance meeting. The roof was now the highlight of his updates. "Thanks to an anonymous donor," he said, "we can redirect our funds toward youth ministry." The room clapped. I bowed my head. Anonymous. The word tasted right. Quiet. Controlled. A currency of its own. He didn't know the donor's name yet, but paperwork always has a way of speaking. Contractors file receipts. County offices log transactions. Records breathe truth in time. I waited, patient as prayer. 2 weeks later, a notice came to my mailbox. Routine filing confirmation from the county clerk system. I folded it neatly, placed it in my Bible between Psalms and Proverbs. The weight of it wasn't paper. It was peace. The next Sunday, Pastor Jerome's voice cracked during service, not from emotion, but from realization. He had found the paper. He didn't say my name out loud. Didn't need to. But his tone softened. His steps slowed. And for the first time in months, he looked at me, not past me. That morning light fell across the pews again, catching the dust, the quiet, the unspoken respect between two men who finally understood the difference between volume and value. Silence had spoken. The next few Sundays felt different. No one said a word about the roof anymore, but everyone noticed how the pastor's laughter had softened. The man who used to tease quiet souls now paused before every sentence, as if measuring its weight. I didn't gloat. That's not how I was raised. Mama always said, "You don't teach a fool by shouting. You let him hear the echo of his own noise." I figured that's what was happening now. His own echo was coming back to him through silence and fresh shingles. He stopped by my seat one morning before service. "Brother Clarence," he said, "how's your mother's garden doing?" "She passed 10 years ago, Pastor." He blinked. "Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, brother. She was a fine woman." "She was," I said. He smiled, but his eyes wandered toward the ceiling, tracing the new beams that glowed faintly in the morning light. The choir began to sing. "This little light of mine," I hummed along, quiet, steady. The words fit better now. After service, Darnell caught me near the door. "Darnell, he's looking nervous these days." Me: "He's thinking." Darnell: "About what?" Me: "About who fixed his roof." Darnell laughed. "That why you smiling?" Me: "Nah, I'm just remembering what peace sounds like." Outside, the air was warm and heavy with magnolia scent. Atlanta summers don't ask for permission. They press against your lungs and slow your steps. I walked to my car, slow, feeling the sweat on my neck, hearing cicadas scream from the trees. That night, I drove by the church again. Lights glowed softly inside. The pastor's car was still there. Through the glass doors, I could see him pacing, looking up at the ceiling. Maybe he was praying, maybe thinking. Either way, it wasn't my business. My part was done. But something about his pacing tugged at me. Not pity, not pride, just the memory of how it felt to be lost in your own noise. I remembered being younger, working under a boss who mistook calm for weakness. I stayed patient, took notes, learned systems. Years later, when he needed a favor from the same office he mocked me for joining, he had to call me directly. Life has its own quiet choreography. By mid-September, the church bulletin carried a small note: "Special thanks to an anonymous member whose generosity kept the rain off our heads." That line meant more than most sermons I'd heard in months. Still, I noticed how folks around the congregation whispered. Names floated. Deacon Harris, Sister May, the Jenkins. Twins. Nobody guessed me. That's the beauty of stillness. People forget to suspect you when you don't move loud. Then, one Sunday, something unexpected happened. Pastor Jerome invited me to lead the opening prayer. He'd never done that before. I hesitated, but his eyes didn't carry mockery anymore, just a kind of humility that comes after thunder. I walked to the pulpit. The wood felt warm under my palms. The microphone squeaked slightly. Lord, I began, we thank you for roofs that don't leak and hearts that finally listen. Some folks chuckled, soft but knowing. I continued, we ask for patience, not just to wait on you, but to wait on each other. When I finished, the pastor nodded, almost to himself. After service, he asked to see me privately. We sat in his office, the air thick with cologne and paper dust. Brother Clarence, he said quietly, I owe you something. Maybe not money, but acknowledgement. I looked at him. For what? He sighed. The roof. The records came through the county office. You didn't have to do that. I leaned back. I didn't do it for you, Pastor. I did it for the building that raised me. He rubbed his forehead. Still, I mocked you. Publicly. I was wrong. I nodded. Apology accepted. He looked relieved, almost boyish. But I wasn't finished. Pastor, I said, what you said that day about humility being weakness, it stuck with me. Sometimes the quiet ones ain't quiet because they scared. They quiet because they listening. He stared for a long time, then smiled, small and tired. You've got a preacher's heart, Clarence. Maybe, I said, but I prefer my sermons under shingles. He laughed at that, genuine this time. And just like that, the tension broke. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. The pastor started changing his tone during service. Less showmanship, more soul. He preached about unseen goodness, about grace with no witnesses. I'd sit there, arms folded, half smiling. The man was learning through echoes again. But not everyone liked the change. Some deacons whispered that the pastor had gone soft. The youth leader said donations slowed down because the fire in his voice had cooled. I heard them, but I stayed out of it. Silence doesn't argue. It waits. Then came the autumn storm. October winds tore branches off the sycamores near the church. Power lines swayed. Rain poured sideways. I drove by again to check, expecting to see damage, but the roof stood firm. Not a single shingle missing. The lights inside flickered, but stayed on. And for the first time, I saw the pastor outside in the storm, helping an old woman into her car. Coat drenched, shoes muddy, no umbrella. He didn't see me parked across the street, but that didn't matter. Watching him, I realized the lesson wasn't just his, it was mine too. You can build something stronger than pride if you know how to stay. Still long enough. The next morning, the newspaper featured a short piece. Local church survives storm thanks to recent repairs. Roof upgraded to withstand Category 2 winds. That line made me smile, not because of credit, but because of proof. Quiet deeds have their own way of finding daylight. A week later, Pastor Jerome called another meeting. This time he started with a quote from Proverbs. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Then he looked directly at me. Something in that look said he wasn't just quoting scripture, he was confessing. Afterward, as folks filed out, he caught my shoulder. Brother Clarence, he said, next Sunday's sermon, would you help me write it? Why me? Because you live what I try to preach. I didn't answer right away. My silence filled the space again, this time not as defiance, but as peace. When I finally nodded, he smiled. Good, maybe God's been teaching us both. That night I sat on my porch listening to the crickets and the faint hum of a gospel station in the distance. The repaired roof glowed under streetlights like a polished crown. I thought of Mama's words again. Let them laugh, baby. Laughter fades faster than legacy. She was right. That next Sunday morning carried a chill in the air. Fall had finally reached Atlanta. The trees outside Mount Hope Baptist were painted gold and brown, and the air smelled like wet leaves and fried catfish from the church kitchen. People came in with scarves, heavy coats, and that Sunday calm you can't fake. Inside, the organ hummed low. I sat where I always did, third pew, right side. The pastor nodded at me as he walked past. No jokes this time, just a respectful silence between two men who'd finally learned how to listen. During announcements, he cleared his throat. Next Sunday, he said, Brother Clarence and I will be delivering a shared message. Something about patience, faith, and the kind of strength that doesn't shout. Heads turned toward me. Some smiled, some whispered. Darnell elbowed me from across the aisle, grinning. I just gave a slow nod. The message wasn't about pride. It was about closure. After the service, the pastor invited me into his office again. This time, he had sweet tea and cornbread on the table. A peace offering, he said, smiling. We talked about the sermon's structure, his words, my reflections. He wanted authenticity, not theatrics. I want people to see faith in motion, he said, not performance. So I told him stories about my mother, how she used to stretch $10 of groceries into a week's worth of meals, about my time working for the county, where you learned patience waiting for systems to move slower than justice, about how sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. He took notes, nodding like a student. Every so often, he'd look up and smile. You ever thought about preaching? I laughed. No, Pastor, I build things. Roofs, fences, quiet plans. He chuckled. Same skill set, different tools. Later that week, I stopped by the church after work. The sky was orange, sunset dripping between the steeple and the cross. I could hear the janitor mopping floors inside, humming Blessed Assurance. I dropped off some notes for the sermon, folded neatly in an envelope. As I left, I noticed the pastor's car parked in the back lot again. The man had started staying late, less for show, more for reflection. When Sunday came, the sanctuary was packed. Word had spread. Folks wanted to hear this shared message. The choir sang slow, their voices rich and heavy. Then it was our turn. Pastor Jerome began softly. Sometimes the loudest storms in your life don't need your thunder. They need your roof. The crowd chuckled, recognizing the metaphor. And sometimes, he continued, God sends someone quiet to fix what noise broke. He stepped back and motioned to me. My hands were steady, but my heart beat slow and deep. I spoke into the microphone, voice calm, measured. I'm not a preacher, I said. I'm just a man who learned something the hard way. Respect doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it comes through steady hands and quiet patience. I paused, scanning the faces. Men in suits, women in bright hats, children swinging their legs. When folks mock your stillness, I said, remember, silence can be strategy, and kindness, that's the longest echo. The room was still. Even the fans stopped humming. The pastor nodded beside me, eyes glistening. When we finished, the congregation rose to their feet. Not a wild applause, just a slow, deliberate standing. It wasn't for fame, it was recognition, the kind that lasts longer than noise. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand. Sister May said, Baby, that message healed something in me. One of the young men from the choir told me, I didn't know quiet could sound so strong. Later that afternoon, I sat on my porch again, sipping sweet tea. The autumn light flickered between the trees. Across the street, kids rode bikes, laughter trailing behind them like music. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. Brother Clarence, a voice said. Speaking. This is Sharon Davis from the City Planning Committee. I heard about the repairs at Mount Hope. We're recognizing community members who invest in preservation efforts. I wanted to confirm, you filed the donation under your name? That's right, I said. Well, congratulations. You're being added to the Community Builder Registry for 2025. I smiled. Appreciate that. She added, your name will appear on the city's official bulletin next week. When I hung up, I just stared at the street for a while. The same street I'd walked down quiet, head low, when people thought I was invisible. Funny how time and silence work. They write your legacy without you having to speak a word. By the next Sunday, the news had spread. A reporter showed up before service, snapping photos of the repaired roof. The plaque that now read Mount Hope Baptist, restored by Community, 2025. Below it, smaller letters, Donor, Clarence J. Evans. When the pastor saw it, he froze. Then he turned to me and smiled slow. "Looks like your silence just found a microphone," he said. I chuckled. "Guess so." He shook my hand right there on the church steps, in front of everyone. Cameras clicked, people clapped, but in my chest there was no pride, just a strange, steady peace. Because the truth was simple. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. For the church. For him. Maybe even for me. That night, as rain began to fall again, I parked across from the church and watched. The roof held firm. No leaks, no noise, just the clean percussion of water meeting strength. In the glow of the streetlight, the plaque gleamed gold, and for the first time in years, I whispered a prayer, not of anger, but of gratitude, for patience, for peace, and for the power of quiet hands. The following week carried a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Autumn sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of Mount Hope, turning the sanctuary into a quilt of color. Reds, blues, and golds danced across the pews as if the building itself was breathing peace again. The gossip had slowed. The laughter was gone. What replaced it was something deeper, respect that didn't need to be spoken aloud. I showed up early that Sunday, same as always, broom in hand. I swept the leaves off the front steps, the same way Mama used to sweep the porch before company came over. Folks nodded as they walked past. "Morning, Brother Clarence." "Morning," I'd reply, simple and steady. Inside, Pastor Jerome was rehearsing his sermon. He paused when he saw me. "You know," he said, "the church feels different lately. Quieter. But it's a good quiet." "That's what happens," I told him, "when peace replaces pride." He smiled, and for a moment I saw the man beneath the title. Just another soul learning, same as the rest of us. That day's sermon carried no jokes, no shouting, just reflection. He spoke about humility, about unseen grace. Sometimes, he said, the miracle isn't in the storm passing. It's in the roof that holds while it rages. People nodded. Some cried. When service ended, he motioned for me to stay. "I want you to see something," he said. He led me to the back office where a folder sat open on the desk. Inside was a notarized document with my name on it. "City Recognition Certificate," it read, "presented to Clarence J. Evans for civic contribution and preservation of historical community structures." He tapped the page gently. "You know, I thought I was the one building this church. Turns out, God was using you to rebuild me." I didn't say much, just a nod, a small smile. "Would you allow me," he continued, "to mention your name next week when we dedicate the new Youth Center Fund?" I paused. "If it helps the kids, go ahead. But make sure you talk more about what they can build, not who paid for it." He laughed quietly. "Always teaching, huh?" "Just reminding," I said. "Credit's lighter when it's shared." That week became busier than usual. The roof's success brought visitors from nearby congregations. Contractors asked for referrals. Even the local paper ran a follow-up story about faith-driven community renewal. My phone rang more than it had in years. One evening, Darnell called. "Man, you famous now." "Hardly," I said. "They got your name in the paper, bro. City Hall gonna be calling you next." I chuckled. "They already did." He whistled. "And to think, you did all this just by staying quiet." "Silence ain't absence, Darnell," I said. "It's direction." Later that night, I walked by the church again. The air smelled like rain and wet asphalt. The light from the steeple hit the clouds, glowing faintly like a beacon. For a second, I thought about Mama again, how she used to hum old hymns when she was angry instead of yelling. She called it singing the devil out. Maybe I'd been doing the same thing all along, just in a different key. But peace never lasts long without challenge. 2 days later, I got a call from the county clerk's office. "Mr. Evans, the woman said, we're reviewing documentation for Mount Hope's recent property maintenance grant. It appears there's a discrepancy. Someone's filed a secondary claim on the roofing fund. My grip tightened on the phone. A secondary claim? By who? By a Reverend Jerome Porter, she said. For a moment I said nothing. I looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I see, I finally said. And what does that mean exactly? It means, she explained, that another party's trying to take credit for the payment, perhaps for tax or institutional purposes. We'll need to verify your original record. After hanging up, I sat still for a while. So that's how it was going to be. A test, not of anger, but of patience. I didn't rush to confront him. Instead, I pulled out my file folder, the same one with every receipt, bank withdrawal, and stamped form. Everything was there. Notarized, filed, legal. My mother's voice echoed in my head again. Always keep your papers clean, baby. Dirty hands can't argue with clean proof. The next morning, I drove to the county office. The clerk, a polite woman with silver glasses, took my documents. She smiled as she read. You've got everything in order, Mr. Evans. We'll process this immediately. Thank you, I said. By Friday, I received confirmation the false claim had been withdrawn. Case number 2025-10873 remained intact under my name. Still, something in me ached, not out of anger, but disappointment. I'd believed the pastor had learned. Maybe he had. Or maybe humility takes more than one sermon to stick. That Sunday, I arrived early again. He was already there, pacing near the altar. Brother Clarence, he began, I need to explain. I raised a hand gently. No need, Pastor. The county already cleared it. He exhaled. It wasn't what it looked like. The accountant said the claim would help us secure extra funding. Funding's fine, I said, but truth shouldn't need a receipt. His shoulders slumped. The man looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in certainty. You're right, he said quietly, and I'm sorry. I nodded. Apology accepted. Again. We stood there in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, just necessary. That night I prayed longer than usual, not for him, but for myself, because forgiveness, when done right, takes strength too. The next morning I got a letter from the city's preservation board confirming the permanent registry listing under my name. It was official now, public record, immutable. And though my name would hang on that plaque for years to come, the truth I carried inside meant more than any engraving. The church roof held firm, but the lesson it carried, that's what truly endured. The following Sunday morning felt heavier than most. The clouds hung low over Auburn Avenue, and a faint drizzle pattered against the church's new shingles. I arrived early, as always. The parking lot glistened. Water slid cleanly down the gutters. No leaks, no drips, no signs of weakness. Inside, the sanctuary smelled of rain-soaked coats and brewing coffee from the fellowship hall. People spoke softer now, like the building itself taught them reverence. Pastor Jerome stood near the pulpit, eyes distant, hands clasped. When he noticed me, he smiled faintly. Roof's holding strong, Brother Clarence. Paperwork, too, I said quietly. He nodded. I know. His voice carried remorse, not guilt. Just a tired honesty. We didn't talk more about it. Sometimes words can't do what silence already settled. When the service began, the choir sang Amazing Grace. The sound filled the rafters. Every note hit the repaired beams and came back richer, like the building was singing along. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, the song didn't feel like habit. It felt like healing. After service, Sister May brought me a plate of peach cobbler. For the man who fixed the Lord's house, she said, grinning. I laughed softly. Thank you, sister. Don't thank me, baby, she said, tapping my arm. You thank him. That evening, I drove to Darnell's place for a backyard cookout. Smoke from the grill hung thick in the autumn air. Kids chased each other across the grass, while old-school blues drifted from a portable speaker. Darnell handed me a plate. You done turned into a legend, man. Church folk talking about your quiet miracle like it's scripture. Let 'em talk, I said. Stories travel faster than truth, but truth lasts longer. He laughed. You sound like you rehearsed that. I smiled. Maybe I did. Halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Evans? A voice said. Yes. This is reporter Lisa Powell from the Atlanta Gazette. We're doing a feature on community restoration projects. Would you be open to an interview? I hesitated. I'm not much for the spotlight. Your pastor already gave a statement, she said gently. He mentioned you as an example of quiet strength, said you taught him what real faith looks like. I froze for a moment, letting that sink in. All right, I said slowly. If it helps the story, we can talk. The next afternoon, she came by the house. A soft-spoken woman, maybe in her 30s, notebook in hand, camera slung over her shoulder. She asked questions about the project, how I planned it, what motivated me. It wasn't revenge, I told her. It was restoration. You can't fix a roof with anger. It'll just leak again next time it rains. She smiled. That's a quote worth printing. The story ran a week later. Headline read, When Silence Builds Stronger Roofs, The Quiet Faith of Clarence Evans. It spread fast. Folks at the barbershop joked that I was Atlanta's silent builder. Someone even made a meme with my picture under the words, Patience pays more than pride. I laughed when I saw it. I wasn't angry about the attention, it just wasn't what I'd been after. But the pastor's reaction surprised me most. The following Sunday, he stood before the congregation and held the newspaper up high. This, he said, isn't just a story about a roof. It's about redemption. Mine. He paused, eyes glistening. I mocked a man of faith, thinking silence meant weakness. But that silence became my teacher. It fixed more than shingles. It fixed my heart. The crowd fell quiet. Even the kids stopped fidgeting. I sat still, staring at the floor, unsure how to feel. Gratitude? Embarrassment? Maybe both. After service, he found me outside. The air smelled of damp grass and exhaust from the passing MARTA bus. Clarence, he said, I've been thinking. We're setting up a mentorship fund for young men in the community. I'd like to name it after your mother, the Lillian Evans Initiative. She raised a man who rebuilt faith with patience. I swallowed hard. You sure about that? Absolutely. She wouldn't have wanted attention. Then we'll make it quiet attention, he said with a grin. I chuckled. That's the best kind. Over the next few weeks, I helped organize the program. We started small, 3 young men from the neighborhood, each learning trades, budgeting, discipline. I spent evenings teaching them how to read property deeds, repair fences, file paperwork the right way. One night, one of them, Jalen, asked, Mr. Evans, why didn't you get mad when the pastor disrespected you? I thought about it for a while before answering. Because anger burns hot but fades quick. Patience burns slow, but it leaves light behind. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't fully yet. One day he would. By December, the city hosted an event honoring community mentors. They handed me a plaque, simple, wooden, with my name engraved. I smiled politely, shook hands, took the photo, then drove home to put it on the shelf beside Mama's Bible. That night, the first winter storm rolled through. The wind howled, the rain hammered down, and the sound of it hitting the roof, steady, solid, unwavering, felt like the earth itself saying, Amen. The church didn't leak. Neither did my peace. Winter in Atlanta always carries a quiet sort of heaviness. The streets slow down, the air sharpens, and every sound echoes longer than usual. The church bells of Mount Hope rang through the cold morning air as I parked my truck under the same oak tree I always had. The branches were bare now, stretching like veins against the gray sky. Inside, the sanctuary felt warmer than ever. The heater hummed, and the scent of cinnamon coffee floated in from the fellowship hall. I paused near the back pew for a moment, taking it all in, the roof, the lights, the laughter. It was the same church that once mocked my stillness, now built on it. When the service started, Pastor Jerome's tone had changed entirely. Gone were the flamboyant jokes and loud gestures. Now his words came out measured, softer. "There's a difference between silence and absence," he said. "Silence means you're still present, just patient." He glanced at me when he said it. I didn't smile, but my eyes said enough. After service, the youth group gathered around the new donation box labeled the Lillian Evans Initiative. The sight of it pulled something deep in me. Mama's name, carved clean in brass. I ran my fingers lightly over the letters. She'd never wanted fame, but she always believed legacy wasn't something you left. It's something you built, one quiet act at a time. Darnell found me near the doorway. "Man, they got your mama's name in here like she's a saint." "She'd laugh at that," I said. "Probably say saints are just folks who didn't quit," and he chuckled. "You ever think maybe this whole thing was bigger than you and the pastor?" I looked at the roof. It always was. That week, the newspaper called again, this time asking if I'd represent the community in a city development forum. I told them no at first, but Pastor Jerome convinced me otherwise. "Sometimes silence has to stand up," he said. "Not to argue, but to witness." So I agreed. The forum took place downtown, in a tall glass building overlooking Peachtree Street. People in suits, name tags, microphones, the kind of room where words usually meant more than actions. I sat in the back at first, listening. Developers talked about budgets, zoning laws, and strategic urban renewal. When my name was called, I walked up slow. "My name's Clarence Evans," I said into the mic. "I don't know much about your spreadsheets or city grants, but I know roofs. I know what happens when they leak, and I know what it takes to keep them from doing it again." Some folks chuckled. I kept talking. "A roof ain't just wood and shingles. It's what stands between someone's faith and their storm. When you fix one quietly, you fix a whole block loud." That line got them. I could see heads nodding. Even the mayor smiled. After the event, a councilwoman approached me. "Mr. Evans, would you consider joining our community advisory board? We could use someone who understands both paperwork and people." I didn't answer right away. I thought of Mama, of the pastor, of the laughter that started it all. "I'll think on it," I said finally. A few days later, I told Pastor Jerome about the offer. He leaned back in his chair and said, "That's purpose right there, Brother Clarence. God took your silence and turned it into service." I smiled faintly. "You sure it's God? Might just be good paperwork." He laughed. Maybe they're both tooth. That laughter, different now. Not the sharp kind that once stung, but the kind that shared weight. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Every Sunday I'd watch as the congregation grew, new faces, young families, old souls returning. Something about stability draws people home, but peace never travels alone. One evening, a letter arrived in the church mailbox addressed to me. The return address said County Historical Review Board. Inside was a notice. The property survey had found inconsistencies in the roofing contractor's documentation. A review was scheduled for February. I read it twice, then a third time. The paper smelled faintly of ink and bureaucracy. I drove straight to the church. The lights were off, except in the pastor's office. He looked up when I walked in. "Evening, Brother Clarence." "Evening," I said. "We've got a problem." He read the letter quietly. "You think they're coming after your filing?" "Maybe, but it's not just that. They might freeze the community grant until it's cleared." He rubbed his temples. "I'll talk to them first thing in the morning." I shook my head. "No, let me handle it. I know their system." And I did. I'd worked with the county utilities long enough to understand how paper trails moved. Slow, tangled, and always in circles. That night, I went home and pulled the original receipts again. Every invoice, every permit, every date stamped and notarized. I spread them across the kitchen table, the lamplight shining over each one like a row of small truths. I took photos, filed duplicates, and attached a short statement for the board. All transactions were personal, voluntary, and verified by the Fulton County Clerk Office. Case number 2025-10873 remains accurate and active. I dropped the envelope off myself the next morning, 8:01 a.m. sharp. A week later, I got a reply. Case dismissed. documentation verified. Property status cleared. Another storm avoided, not through shouting, not through pride, but through clean, quiet proof. That Sunday, I sat in my usual spot. The roof above me glowed faintly in the morning light. The pastor paused mid-sermon and looked directly at me. Faith, he said slowly, isn't loud. It's legal. The congregation laughed gently, but I didn't, because I knew what he meant. Faith leaves a record. By the time February rolled in, Atlanta was half winter, half spring. The city couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The mornings were cold enough to see your breath, but by noon, the sunlight made you forget your coat. That Sunday morning, I stood outside Mount Hope Baptist and looked up at the roof. Not a crack, not a patch, just smooth slate gleaming against the sky. Inside, the church felt alive again. Children's laughter echoed down the hallway, the ushers' white gloves flashed between pews, and the choir tuned their voices. It was the kind of sound that once got buried under ego, but now carried peace. Pastor Jerome walked up behind me. You ever think God used you to teach me? I didn't turn. I think God uses everybody, Pastor. We just don't all listen. He chuckled softly. You ever gonna let me forget that? I smiled faintly. Not my job to make you forget. My job's to remember. He nodded, then adjusted his tie and headed for the pulpit. That day's message was about stewardship, how faith isn't just about giving, but maintaining what you build. He quoted from Luke, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." I thought about that line long after service ended. It stayed with me through lunch, through the long, quiet drive home, through the hum of my porch light flickering in the dusk. Because sometimes, the real test isn't fixing what's broken. It's keeping it strong when nobody's watching. The next week brought news I didn't expect. The county contacted me again, this time not for a dispute, but an invitation. The city council wanted to commission a community faith restoration program, modeled after Mount Hope's story. They wanted me to help oversee the pilot. Mr. Evans, the email read, your case has inspired a framework for combining civic repair with faith-based volunteerism. Your leadership would be instrumental. Leadership. The word hit different when you never asked for it. I printed the letter and brought it to the pastor. He read it slowly, then looked up at me. You have no idea what this means. I think I do, I said. It means we can fix more than roofs. We spent the next few weeks drafting proposals. Evening meetings turned into late-night planning sessions. Church tables covered in blueprints, coffee cups, and county forms. I handled logistics, permits, codes, insurance filings. He handled outreach, churches, donors, volunteers. For the first time, we worked side by side, not across from each other. But with new ground always comes new pressure. Some of the older deacons didn't like it. They said I was overstepping, that the pastor was giving me too much control. It's not proper, one said. He's not ordained. I stayed quiet. Let them talk. But Pastor Jerome wasn't having it. He may not be ordained, he told them, but he's anointed. That shut the room down. The next day, someone left an anonymous note in my mailbox. You think you're better than us now? Careful, Brother Evans. Pride don't leak, it floods. No signature, just the smell of cheap cologne on the paper. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer with the rest of my papers. Another storm, another test. When I saw the pastor later that week, I told him about it. He sighed. Every time you build something new, somebody gonna test its foundation. I ain't worried, I said. My foundation's been tested before. The program launched that March. We started with one neighborhood, old row houses in Vine City. Roof repairs, porch restorations, drainage fixes. Each home carried a story, each nail a memory. The local news covered it. They called it Faith in Action, the Evans Initiative. I didn't correct them, but I made sure the pastor's name was in every press mention too. Fair was fair. Then one evening, while reviewing invoices, I noticed something odd. One of the subcontractor receipts, dated before our official launch, listed the pastor's signature next to an amount that didn't match the ledger. Only a few $100s off. But off, nonetheless. I double-checked, cross-referenced. The error was real. Maybe accidental, maybe not. That night I sat at my kitchen table with that paper under the lamp, feeling that old familiar ache in my chest. Not anger, just the weight of knowing good people can still stumble. Next morning I went to his office. He was preparing Sunday notes, humming softly. "Pastor," I said, laying the paper on his desk. He read it, frown deepening. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. "That's a clerical error. It has to be." "I hope so," I said, "because if it ain't, it'll undo everything we've built." He nodded. "Give me a day. I'll make it right." He did. The next day, he called the board, corrected the figures, and publicly acknowledged the oversight during service. "Integrity," he said from the pulpit, "ain't about being perfect. It's about fixing what you find before someone else has to." That moment changed something again. The congregation saw transparency, not weakness, and I saw proof that silence didn't just teach him, it humbled him. That evening we stood outside together under the pink Atlanta sky, the church glowing behind us. He turned to me. "You ever think maybe your silence wasn't revenge at all?" I smiled faintly. I stopped thinking of it that way a long time ago. "What do you call it now?" "Guidance." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe I was meant to follow." We shook hands as the bells rang 6 o'clock. The sound drifted across the street, carried by wind and memory. For once, I didn't feel like the quiet man in the corner pew anymore. I felt like part of something, built slow, steady, and honest. Because silence, when it's strong enough, doesn't end stories. It builds new ones. Spring came early that year. The city smelled of rain and red clay, the air thick with the hum of new beginnings. Mount Hope's bell tower gleamed beneath the rising sun, every pane of glass catching light like a promise. The church that once leaked now stood taller, stronger, as if the whole building had learned to breathe again. I arrived before anyone else, unlocking the side door the way I always did. The floorboards creaked under my shoes. I ran my hand across the wooden pews, still smooth from years of polish and prayer. Quiet spaces hold history. You can feel it. Every sermon, every tear, every apology that never made it to words. As I placed my keys on the pulpit, I noticed a single envelope resting on top. My name written in the pastor's handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Brother Clarence," it began, "I'm stepping down from Mount Hope next month. Not because of scandal, but because of revelation. You showed me what leadership looks like when pride is stripped away. This church is strong again, not from my preaching, but from your patience. I'll be recommending you to chair the new Faith Restoration Board. You've earned it. Jerome." I sat down, letter trembling in my hands. My first thought wasn't joy. It was silence. Heavy, grateful silence. The following Sunday, the congregation filled every seat. The air buzzed with rumor. Pastor Jerome walked to the pulpit with slow, steady steps. "I've served here for 22 years, he said, voice calm, "but it's time for me to plant seeds elsewhere." Gasps rippled through the pews. He raised a hand. "This decision was made in peace, not conflict. The Lord moves people in his own rhythm." Then he turned toward me. "And before I go, I need to thank the man who reminded me that quiet hands can build louder than sermons. Brother Clarence Evans." The congregation erupted into applause. I stayed seated at first, heart pounding in my chest. When I finally stood, the sound only grew louder. He motioned me forward. My steps echoed down the aisle. 12 long steps that felt like years. When I reached the pulpit, he handed me the microphone. "I didn't fix this church," I said softly. "I just stopped waiting for someone else to." Laughter rolled through the room, warm and knowing. I continued, "We all got storms. Some you speak to, some you outlast. I chose the second kind." When the service ended, people came up one by one. Handshakes, hugs, tears. Darnell whispered, You done turned the whole script upside down. I grinned. Nah, just rewrote the ending. That week I met with the city's Faith Restoration Committee for the first time. It was strange sitting in a conference room instead of a pew. The table was covered in folders labeled Southwest Housing Grant, Vine City Expansion, Historic Repair Phase 2. A young council member named Andrea looked up from her notes. Mr. Evans, you'll oversee the new pilot across 5 counties. We want your structure, the way you organized Mount Hope, as the model. I can do that, I said, but we're not building churches. We're rebuilding trust. She smiled. That's exactly why we picked you. Over the next few months, I traveled from one end of Georgia to the other. Small towns, rural parishes, forgotten neighborhoods. Every place had its own broken roof, its own quiet story. I'd meet men with calloused hands, mothers holding blueprints, teenagers volunteering on weekends. Each nail we drove felt like redemption multiplied. Everywhere I went, I carried a small pocket Bible with Mama's name written inside. On the back page, she'd written a line I'd nearly forgotten. Don't rush your justice, baby. It blooms in its own season. By summer, the Faith Restoration Program was being talked about statewide. The mayor held a press event, cameras flashing, microphones pointed. I hated every second of it, but I stood there anyway. When they asked how it all started, I said, it began with a leak and a lesson. The crowd laughed, but I meant it. Later that night, I drove back to Mount Hope. The parking lot was empty except for Jerome's old Buick, still parked in the corner. He was sitting inside, engine off, radio low. I tapped on the window. Didn't expect to see you, I said. He smiled. Didn't expect to leave so soon. You sure you're ready? He looked at the church, the glowing windows, the steady roof. Yeah, he said, because I'm not leaving something broken. I'm leaving something better. We sat in silence for a while. The air buzzed with crickets and faraway traffic. Then he said quietly, You know, I used to think the devil worked loud, but now I realize sometimes it's God who whispers. I nodded, and when you listen close enough, the whisper sounds like peace. He smiled, reached out, and shook my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes clear. Take care of her, he said, glancing at the church. I will, I said, and I'll keep the roof dry. That night, as I watched him drive away, the steeple light flickered once, then steadied. The sky was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for applause. In that moment, I realized my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about replacement, replacing bitterness with balance, laughter with legacy, pride with peace. The roof had been fixed, but the real repair had always been inside us. The summer heat hit Atlanta hard that year. The air shimmered above the asphalt, and even the cicadas sounded tired. But inside Mount Hope Baptist, the fans spun slow and steady, keeping the sanctuary cool. The light through the stained glass looked almost liquid, gold, crimson, violet, pouring across the pews like anointing oil. It had been 3 months since Pastor Jerome's departure. Folks still spoke of him fondly, but the tone was peaceful now, not mournful. Change doesn't always come through fire. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a cool morning after a long storm. The church had grown, more families, more volunteers, more laughter in the fellowship hall. On the first Sunday of June, the board elected a new committee to manage the Faith Restoration Program officially. They asked me to chair it. I told them I'd only do it on one condition. We keep every project transparent, every dollar accounted for, every hand acknowledged. They all agreed. Lessons learned become walls worth keeping. After the vote, Darnell slapped me on the back. Brother Chairman Evans, look at you, I grinned. Don't start. He laughed. Man, who would have thought the quiet brother in the third pew would end up leading the whole city program? I shrugged. God's got a sense of humor. That week, we broke ground on the first citywide restoration site, a neglected youth center near the old train tracks. The building's paint was peeling, the ceiling sagged, and graffiti covered the front doors. But under the grime, you could still see potential. I brought in a small crew, mostly young men from the Lillian Evans initiative. We sanded walls, repaired beams, replaced tiles. I taught them how to measure twice, cut once, how to work in rhythm, how to respect silence while you build. One of the boys, Jalen, looked up at me mid-shift. "Mr. Evans, you ever miss being mad?" I chuckled. "What you mean, son?" He grinned. "Like, you ever miss the fight? The fire?" I leaned on the hammer, thinking. Anger's like lightning. Looks powerful, but it burns out fast. Peace. That's thunder. It rolls longer. He nodded slowly. "Guess I'd rather be thunder then." I smiled. Good answer. By the end of July, the youth center's roof gleamed under the sun. Reporters came again, cameras flashing, microphones out. I stood beside the new director, a young woman from the community named Tiffany. She spoke with confidence, pride shining in her voice. "This building was saved by faith, paperwork, and patience," she said, "and by a man who proves silence isn't weakness." When she looked at me, the crowd followed her gaze. Applause broke out, soft but strong. Later, after everyone left, I stayed behind to lock up. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust lingered in the air. The lights flickered against the new glass windows, clean and clear. I stood there for a long moment, just listening, to the hum of electricity, to the faint echo of my mother's favorite hymn still playing in my mind. "Precious Lord, take my hand." That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Brother Evans?" I turned. It was Andrea from the city council. She smiled warmly, clipboard tucked under her arm. "We're expanding the program, county-wide this time, and we want you to lead the advisory panel." I sighed softly. "That's a lot of roofs," she laughed, "and a lot of patience." "Then I'll think about it." She nodded. "You always do." When she left, I walked outside into the humid twilight. The street lamps flickered on one by one, their halos glowing through the haze. Across town, thunder rumbled far away. I could smell the coming rain. The next Sunday, Mount Hope was packed again. The congregation had voted in a new pastor, a young man named Marcus Green, 38, full of energy, but grounded in heart. Before his first sermon, he asked me to speak. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. This church was built by faith. But faith isn't loud. It's loyal. It shows up when no one claps. It files the paperwork. It fixes the roof. I paused. The congregation hung on every word. "When storms come," I continued, "you don't pray for less rain. You make sure your roof can take it." A few chuckles, a few nods, then silence, the kind that means people are really listening. After the service, the new pastor approached me. "Brother Evans," he said, "you got a preacher's soul." I smiled. "No, pastor, I got a builder's hands. They just learned to speak." He laughed softly. Either way, God's still using both. That night, I drove home in the rain. Heavy drops hit the windshield, rhythmic and calm. When I parked, I looked at the church one last time through the blur of water and streetlight. The roof held firm, defiant against the storm. Inside my house, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, the sound of rain steady above me. Somewhere between thunder and peace, I realized something I hadn't before. This whole journey, from mockery to ministry, wasn't about teaching others. It was about learning myself. That silence I carried wasn't armor, it was direction. It led me here, to calm waters, solid ground, and a roof that could weather anything. By the time autumn came back around, a full year had passed since the laughter that started it all. The leaves along Auburn Avenue were turning orange and rust again, and Mount Hope Baptist stood like a story made, solid, roof shining, windows clear, walls steady. Every storm since had come and gone, but the church hadn't leaked once. That Sunday morning, the air carried that mix of fried fish, fresh rain, and faint perfume that only old churches have. The choir was tuning up. Children were running in the aisles, and the ushers, those same ones who used to side-eye me when I stayed quiet, now greeted me first, like I'd always belonged in the center instead of the corner. Pastor Marcus was already up front, flipping through his notes. He gave me a nod. Brother Evans, you ready for your part? I smiled. Been ready since last year. He grinned. Then today's yours. The service began. Gospel swelled from the choir stand, brass section crisp and bright. It wasn't the kind of praise that shakes walls. It was the kind that steadies hearts. When the song faded, the pastor stepped up. Before I preach today, he said, we've got a testimony that built more than a roof. It built a lesson. He motioned to me. The congregation clapped as I walked to the pulpit, slow and deliberate. The wooden steps creaked the way they always had. I looked out over faces, some old, some new, all waiting. My name's Clarence, I began. Some of y'all know the story. Some just see the roof and think, that's the miracle. A soft laugh rippled through the room, but the real miracle wasn't in what got fixed. It was in who learned. The room quieted. Even the fans slowed. Last year, when the pastor laughed, I sat right there and said nothing. Not out of fear, out of faith. I learned you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to win to be right. And sometimes you don't even have to fight to get justice. You just have to let time do what tempers can't. A few amens echoed from the back. I've seen what silence can build. It built this roof. It built this program. And it rebuilt some hearts along the way, including mine. I paused. If you want revenge, find a mirror. If you want peace, find patience. The congregation rose, not loud, just slow, united. Applause filled the sanctuary like wind through trees. I stepped back, humbled. Pastor Marcus hugged me right there at the pulpit. You just preached my sermon for me, he said, smiling. I'll take a collection plate cut, I joked, and the crowd burst into laughter. After service, folks lined up to shake my hand, same hands that once laid shingles, and signed forms and held back words that didn't need saying. The youth I'd mentored stood near the back, grinning. One of them, Jalen, said, Mr. Evans, I get it now. Thunder lasts longer. I nodded. Yes, it does, son. Yes, it does. Later that afternoon, I walked outside into the sunlight. The church bell rang 12 times, slow and even. I looked up at the roof one more time, strong, weathered, and sure. That's when Andrea from the city council pulled up in her car. She got out, waving a folder. Mr. Evans, it's official. The state's adopting your faith restoration model. 5 more cities coming on board. I smiled. That's good news. You'll be on the oversight board. I laughed. Seems like I'll never get away from roofs. She shook her head. No, sir, you're just covering more people now. That evening I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, the sun slipping low behind the church steeple. The same light filtered through the same windows that once cracked under neglect, now steady and golden. I thought about Pastor Jerome, probably preaching somewhere smaller, humbler, maybe even happier. I thought about Mama, how she'd hum while patching the kitchen ceiling, saying, if you fix something right once, you won't have to fix it twice. She was right. A breeze swept through, rustling the leaves across my yard. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for forgiveness, not for victory, just for gratitude. For storms survived, for laughter that became lesson, for a silence that built something that even rain couldn't break. Across the street, Mount Hope's bell rang once more. It didn't echo pride, it echoed peace. And as the evening light faded, I realized the truest sound of victory isn't a shout or applause. It's the quiet steadiness of something that finally stands firm. If this story spoke to you like the video, subscribe and share your thoughts below.